Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Daryl Grove and I am not joined by Taylor Rockwell today because he is fully 3,000 miles away in Seattle for MLS Cup. But don't worry, I have two great guests that I've chatted with and two great conversations to share with you, I promise. Before I introduce my guests, I'm very excited to let you know / remind you that the second season of our spin-off show, Soccer 101, is underway. Episode 1 published last night, in which Taylor and I collaborate and then argue and then compromise to create our all-time US men's national team 11. If that sounds good to you, then please either A, go refresh your Soccer 101 feed, or B, go subscribe to Soccer 101 and start listening. A lot of time and a lot of love has gone into every episode of Soccer 101, so I can confidently say it's some of our very best work. But back to today. My first guest is Jeff Kassouf of The Equalizer. Jeff and I spoke early this morning, just a few short, cold hours after Vlatko Andonovski's debut as US Women's National Team head coach, which was a 3-2 win over Sweden. Jeff and I talked about what's changed and what stayed the same under the new head coach. I'd call it evolution, not revolution. And we also looked ahead to what the future holds for the World Cup winning team. Later in the show, I talked to Bobby Warshaw to get his preview of MLS Cup. Lots of good tactical talk and insight in that conversation, mostly from Bobby, to help you get prepped or pumped or both for Sunday's game. We also semi-accidentally veer off into talking US men's national team and the Berhalter era, so stick around to the end for that part of the conversation. But first, here's me and Jeff Kassouf talking Vlatko and the US women's national team. Jeff, good morning to you in Columbus. How you doing?
I'm good. Just warming up still from last night.
Yeah, it looked pretty cold at the game, but the goals were flowing. They were hot goals. USA 3, Sweden 2 on Vlatko's debut. My first big question is, what were the differences you saw watching a Vlatko US Women's National Team versus a Jill Ellis US Women's National Team?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was a huge change in style and system, but certainly we saw some of kind of the nuances that I think that we've come to know Vlatko Andonovski for in the NWSL and kind of what we expected that he might do. So, that 4-1-4-1 sort of setup that they were in defensively, we saw it to some degree with Jill Ellis, who I think was, very willing to kind of rotate systems and change shape even within games. But, it wasn't sort of her predominant formation. I think certainly that 4-3-3, which really put a lot of pressure on those three central midfielders to cover a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Was kind of her staple. And with Vlatko last night, obviously only one game, but that 4-1-4-1 sort of set up defensively, I think gave some nice cover to that midfield. And, it looked really, tight and sound. Obviously they had that 4-minute stretch where they kind of gave up. It was a little bit fluky, those two goals, like they kind of shut down for a few minutes there. But
yeah, they were both,
I thought it looked good overall.
Both of the Sweden goals were somewhat freak occurrences, right? I saw on the first goal, I think Sauerbrunn and Horan both went sort of running out to close down the same person and left the eventual goal scorer wide open. And then obviously there was the miscommunication between Sauerbrunn and Neuer. But apart from that, I thought sitting in the 4-1-4-1, there was almost no space for Sweden to play into. And I don't think I ever saw that with the Jill Ellis team, because I thought Jill Ellis teams would more often like be happier to go higher and go chase the ball a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, this is this team had, I'd say over the past year and a half, had really sort of formed an identity that, look, they have quality defenders at the back, but their MO really had become, if we have to, we're going to outscore you because we have the best front three in the world and we can go score 4 goals or maybe 13, depending on, who the opponent is. So I think that had really developed. And look, there was some sacrificing of of some defensive responsibilities, and there were some sacrifices to be made in that system. So I think in that sense, Vlatko Andonovski being known for kind of his defensive shape, his teams having defensive discipline, I think there's kind of, we're seeing immediate dividends there.
Yeah, with like Tobin Heath defensive headers in central midfield.
Yeah, and
That was
starting
new on me.
counters too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about with the ball? I obviously you're more familiar with the team than I am. I would say there seemed more of a determination to pass the ball from the back and not go so direct. I think I'd argue that Jill Ellis teams were more direct and almost like blunt force. Like sometimes we'll just power the ball forward and then we'll overpower you. Whereas it seemed more pass under Vlatko. Am I sort of overemphasizing that, or was that actually happening?
No, I think it was happening. Yeah, I think certainly Jill Ellis's teams, more direct. I think that they did develop through that last sort of phase of her tenure, an ability to play more through, on the ground. But certainly was still, and look, they had the pieces to do it with Alex Morgan, with Megan Rapinoe, even trying to sort of find and isolate Tobin Heath on a flank. So, I think we did see more playing through the actual sort of central channels. Last night you saw sort of, as you said, playing out of the back, you find Julie Ertz. There was a combination there in the second half where Ertz and Lloyd, who had checked down, had combined for a 1-2, and then it got sprayed wide. So I think you do see some more, or I guess I should say through one game you see, more playing through that central midfield. And I think, too, it's probably worth pointing out, I think tactically all of these things are there. They were there, and they're sort of what we expect from Andonovski. But also I think there is kind of that first game bump that you get with any manager where you're obviously sort of playing for your job to a degree, kind of a new tryout, and everybody's happy now, which is, as we know, not always the case on teams. So I think that there's a little bit of that first game bump of a new manager.
So what are the potential future sources of unhappiness?
Yeah, a very good question. Look, I think the most fascinating thing here is going to be that Vlatko is, I would say, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say universally praised. I've never heard a bad word spoken about him by a player, a coach. So I think that you go from that where everybody's happy, and now obviously he doesn't have to make immediate decisions, which I think is good for him in terms of not having to cut anybody. Olympics are still 8 months away, so I think that those sources are going to be, look, there's got to be some turnover. I think that the question at fullback, where Kelly O'Hara's been hurt a lot, Crystal Dunn, who's hurt now from the NWSL Championship, is she a fullback for you? Obviously, different coaches view her very different ways, and she's performed well in all of those roles. So I think fullback, and then, look, the number 9 position. Yeah, I think last night was a really important night for Carly Lloyd. She spoke, at the end of that Jill Ellis tenure about not feeling like she got a fair shake at a starting role and feeling like she was training well and not necessarily seeing the minutes. So, going out there, getting the nod, obviously in the 9 role, Alex Morgan not in the team right now with expecting her first child in April. So, a really strong performance from Lloyd, who I think was very good at the end of the NWSL season. And I think that's where, that's one of the biggest questions, I'd say, is needing a number 9. Is it her? Is it her for 90 minutes? And who else does he potentially try there? And I think that's going to be a big focal point, because I think you have your answers in midfield for the most part. I think you mostly have your answers at center back, goalkeeper. So who's number 9, particularly in this phase where, Alex is not with the team, and, coming back into the team is going to be a challenge. Nobody's really going to know what that's going to look like until May. So I think that's a big question going into Tokyo.
Yeah, I think my conception of Carly Lloyd as a 37-year-old former central midfielder turned forward was much less mobile than the player that I saw last night. She was all over the place, like running into channels to be available, dropping back into midfield to connect play, making runs off the shoulders of defenders. I think even late into the game, she was sort of beating players to what was sort of 40, 60 balls not in her favour. If you told me this was a 25-year-old, like, sort of up-and-coming striker based on that performance, I absolutely would have believed you. So was this out of the ordinary for Carly Lloyd, or is this always how she's performed when she's played centre forward?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's that key point is the last one I think we saw, look, 2015 was the huge sort of moment for her. Obviously she's had the Olympic moments, but that 2015 World Cup, the hat trick in the final, that midfield goal, that was just the beginning of shifting her essentially into a forward role. We saw that at the tail end of that World Cup, and that continued for a little bit, and then obviously sort of this team and Jill Ellis hit reset after the 2016 Olympics, and that's where the system changed. It changed to one that didn't necessarily suit her as well, and also one where Alex Morgan as the 9 with both the ability to turn in behind and check down became the sort of preferred option. And so I think, this is a continuation of that sort of peaking Carly Lloyd that we saw in 2015, where she's sort of free of heavy defensive responsibilities that you'd expect from even maybe an attacking center mid or anybody in the midfield. And I think I don't want to say we lost 2 years of it, but we haven't seen it in a while, to your point.
And she'll be 38 at the Olympics, but honestly, based on what I saw last night, I don't think it's even worth thinking about her age, because I don't really see her slowing down.
No, I mean, look, fitness is a staple of hers, as she said. Many of times, I think she's told us, in the media throughout these past few months that she's as fit as ever. I think she ended the NWSL season incredibly strong with Sky Blue, and I think that's I think like in a vacuum, you'd look and say, okay, she's going to be 38. Like, she's had to have lost some speed in that, and obviously she's going to say, I'm as fit as ever. But I've come to learn through many years of covering Carly Lloyd that she's being legit. That she is very fit. I think that's something that will never be a question for her as long as she's playing. Just the way she works and what her fitness level is.
And then speaking of Alex Morgan, I think baby's due in April, you said. Olympics are in the late summer usually, sort of late July, early August. What is it, based on your experience with players coming back to soccer after giving birth, is that a realistic time frame?
Look, I think it's really tough to say. I mean, I'm not the greatest expert, I guess, but on the particular of it. But I think the best way to look at it is, Alex Morgan said this week, publicly and on the record that she plans to be back, and she, Tokyo is part of her plans. I think it's possible, but really difficult is probably the best way to put it. And and I don't think anybody's really going to know until we haven't. She said April 2020. We don't know if that could be April 1st, could be April 30th, and when you've got sort of 2 to 3 months to play with, that's a big difference as well. And I think it's just a matter of after she's hopefully given birth to a healthy baby, then it's a matter of her kind of assessing where she's at, and it's going to be the timeline is really tight. I don't think it's impossible, but I think where it becomes kind of an even more interesting thing to watch is an 18-player roster for the Olympics rather than a 23 where every single roster spot counts. And it's a very different situation, but we saw in 2016 when Jill Ellis took the risk on I don't know what you want to call her, a 60% maybe, Megan Rapinoe, and that really backfired.
Yeah, I remember.
So I think you look at an 18-player roster. I mean, you need to be really sure that all 18 can essentially be a 90-minute player for you.
Here's a tough question for you. It's only an 18-player roster, which player do you see who didn't make the World Cup roster who has a chance to make this smaller Olympic roster?
I actually don't think it's all that tough. I think Casey Short is kind of the obvious one. I mean, she's really been with the team for 3-4 years now, and last one cut essentially from the World Cup roster. Back to the point of questions of fullback. He started at fullback, against Sweden here in Andonovski's first game, and I think he'll look to her as at least one of his starting fullbacks, and that'll depend obviously on how much he kind of moves around some others. But I think. I'm not going to call her a lock because I would have thought that she would have been in France, frankly, and that kind of took a a turn sort of at the last minute there when that roster got named. But I think I'd pretty confidently say that she'd be on that Olympic roster even despite missing France.
What do you make of her performance last night?
Yeah, I mean, look, I thought, again, that sort of 4 or 5 minute blip where they just kind of shut off, and certainly that second goal where I thought it was, it was a disappointing mistake if you're the U.S. because it really didn't need to happen and it really came from nothing. It was just a miscommunication. But I thought the 75 minutes before that defensively were really sound. I thought that, Abby Dahlkemper, Becky Sauerbrunn at center back didn't have much to do. Fullbacks got forward nicely. As we talked about here, played through the midfield quite a bit. And Carly Lloyd, I mean, we haven't even really mentioned her second goal, which was like ridiculous and audacious chip of Hedvig Lindahl. So I thought overall a really sound performance. I mean, 3-0 after 31 was probably as good as you could ask for if you're first game as a manager.
Just to clarify, I was asking about Casey Short, like what you thought of her performance.
Oh my gosh, I'm over here rambling.
No worries, but you gave us a nice capsule review of the game there.
No, Casey Short. Yeah, I think mostly similar. Mostly a good game, getting forward and defending. I thought her and Emily Sonnet as well, good on the flanks. But I think a solid performance and kind of one that we've come to expect from her. I mean, she drew the penalty too, getting forward. So I think an overall strong performance from her.
And then we've got Costa Rica coming up, I believe, Sunday night. Are we expecting Vlatko to sort of do major rotation, or will he put out a similar sort of lineup?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I don't think there's a major rotation to be had just based on the lineup. The sort of training camp roster that he has. Some new players with a lot of regulars injured. I mean, I think he'll give some rest. I think Julie Ertz, who has played nonstop this year, that was a planned substitution. He said when she came out at halftime. So I think there's some rest to be had.
So maybe Andy Sullivan gets a start?
Could be, yeah. I mean, look, she's earned it, I think, from the year she's had with the Washington Spirit. And, it's worth getting a look at her against, to be fair, an opponent that will be decent, but not nearly at the level of Sweden where maybe you can, take make a few sort of experiments with the lineup.
And then any chance we get to see, say, someone other than Carly Lloyd at centre forward, like maybe Lynn Williams at forward instead of on the wing, or maybe Jess McDonald gets to start centre forward? Or is this just Carly Lloyd all the time now?
I don't think it's Carly Lloyd all the time, but I think as sort of the incumbent, and certainly after a whole body of work for her career and recently, obviously, but especially Thursday, I think it's kind of her job to lose would be the best way to put it. Whether that means she's starting every single game, including sort of back-to-back friendlies like that against the Costa Rica. We'll see. I mean, in terms of who else could be there, I think you could try Lynn Williams there, and I'd be interested to see her there. I talked to her on Wednesday, and she said they have been training her as a number 9 and a number 7. So we obviously saw her in that wide role Thursday. Yeah. Would be interested to see her at center forward. And, I'm also interested in that position of what happens with Kristen Press. She's been very good out wide. I thought she was again on Thursday, and that has been a real development of late in her career, where she was not as much a wide player, but she came onto the scene as a kind of a goal poaching number 9, which is what this role looks like in the Andonovski era. So I'd be interested to see her in there.
And then a final question, because I know we've got to get you out of here to get you on a flight. What are the next steps towards the Olympics? What's up next for Vlatko?
Well, there's a December identification camp, which will be none of the regulars, essentially, NWSL players who have performed well this year. I'm not sure if college players based on timing, and whoever else he identifies, maybe from Europe. So, I think that's a camp where he can get to look at a bunch of players that he's either coached or coached against in the league and see them against each other in an environment where they're essentially fighting for time. And maybe, say there's 20, 25 people in that camp. Maybe a couple of them come out of that with a legitimate shot at, an invite to January camp. And I think that'll be an interesting sort of window into how he sees kind of the fringe areas of the roster. because I think, the core of this roster to a large degree, especially to that 18 player roster size point, I think the core of this roster is fairly set, and we're looking at what are those sort of 15, 16 through 18, and then the alternates, really those four alternates, what are those going to look like? And I think that's where a December ID camp and then obviously Olympic qualifying in January, where we just saw the draw, which shouldn't be any problem for the U.S. But those are sort of the next steps, and obviously qualifying, as they'll remind you that they still have to do.
And then just planning out into the future, you said there's Olympic qualifying in January and I think early February, right? And then there's the Olympics in the summer. Is there a She Believes Cup scheduled for March? Do you know?
Yes, there is a She Believes Cup that's coming back. I think it's in its usual late February time frame into March. So that'll be a big one too. Yeah, in terms of always, I haven't actually seen who the confirmed teams are, if it's the same as last year, but always sort of top quality opponent versus respect to them, a CONCACAF minnow that they'll get in qualifying. So I think that'll be an important one. And then whatever friendlies he does schedule to get ready, where I think we've seen that in the past with Jill Ellis, where both World Cups, the U.S. went to France and got mostly played off the park and used that game as kind of learning lesson, use those games as learning lessons. So, a Sweden level, it's a good start. And then we'll get some more sort of top 10 quality teams with a She Believes and really see how the system works against those teams rather than a team that might bunker on them.
All right, well, Jeff, thanks so much for your time this morning. Hopefully I've given you plenty of time left to still pack that case, get on that flight. If people want to hear more from you, where can they find it? Where can they find all things The Equalizer? Yeah, all things Equalizer, equalizersoccer.com. Where all our social handles are Equalizer Soccer or Equalizer_soccer. And then, between Twitter with our news and subscribe to equalizersoccer.com, we got all our premium content. And you get all your NWSL and US Women's National Team news and analysis. And worth noting, the premium content, very affordable, right? We're not talking hundreds and hundreds of dollars here. No, $59 a year, $550 a month, and we're frequently running discounts. A champion code, put in champion at checkout, you get 40% off your first year right now. So, I'd like to think very affordable, less than that cup of coffee. All right, I'll put a link in the show notes, and I'll remind people, champion was the discount code if people want to sign up. All right, Jeff, thanks once again. Thanks for your time, and look forward to talking to you again in the future. Once again, that was Jeff Kassouf of The Equalizer. Today's show is not sponsored by The Equalizer, though I do recommend reading and subscribing because I'm a big fan of high-quality, independent soccer media, especially when it's US-based. Today's show is sponsored by Roughneck Scarves. If you've been thinking about showing your support for the US Women's National Team, then click yourself over to roughneckscarves.com and have a peruse of the Women's National Team section. There's the new 4-star scarf representing, obviously, the 4 World Cup trophies. There's the scarf that simply reads USWNT in high definition red, white and blue knit. Yes, there's such a thing as high definition knit. And there are plenty of player-specific scarves, including a Carly Lloyd number 10 scarf, which it looks like is going to stay fashionable for a while longer than we all predicted. Probably good through the end of summer 2020, at least, it seems. All these scarves are priced $29.95. Or are they? Because if you enter the discount code TOTALSOCCERSHOW, all one word, you'll get 20% off. That's TOTALSOCCERSHOW, all one word, for 20% off. And if my math is correct, then 20% off of $29.95 means you'll be paying 80% of the original price. The URL is roughneckscarves.com. The link is in the show notes, and your neck is just waiting for that warm, roughnecky goodness. Up next, it's Bobby Warshaw. You all know Bobby by now, right? Former MLS player, now with MLSsoccer.com, a regular on the Extra Time broadcast/podcast, and a familiar voice here on the Total Soccer Show. Bobby's in Seattle for MLS Cup, so I called him up to get a tactical preview of the game and then to get his thoughts on the current state of the US men's national team. I've got Bobby Warshaw on the phone. He is up and about early in Seattle. Hello, Bobby.
What's up, Daryl? Thanks for having me.
You are getting ready for MLS Cup. I'm going to ask the big question first. Have you run into Brian Schmetzer yet while you're out there?
Oh, wow. I have not yet, but I hope I do. I hope I can shake his hand and say congratulations. All
right, because you kind of did. I heard the extra time after Brian Schmetzer made the comments of, I'm sure Bobby Warshaw will tell me how I did it. You did explain tactically how Seattle did it, and it, to my mind, it matched up with what I saw on the screen. You talked about Seattle playing sort of compact but with a high line and kind of defensive. And I don't know if you put that to Brian Schmetzer, this is in the conference final, obviously, I don't think he'd be able to argue otherwise, right?
No. And, they had the game plan absolutely right against LAFC. Even parts that I, in my head, had all year been thinking to myself, if I were to play this juggernaut that is LAFC, how would I do it? And they pretty much did every component of it. My only point with Seattle is that in almost every other game over the last 3 years, they did not have that level of attention to detail, which is fine, right? Like maybe if you have Nico Ladero and Chad Marshall and Ozzy Alonso and Raul Ruiz, you don't need to be strict in how you go about it. But in this one specific game, they had a very detailed plan and they did it absolutely perfectly. And yes, I will go ahead and acknowledge that I'm pretty sure it's almost exactly what I told them to do before the game, but we'll leave that little detail out of it.
Well, so MLS Cup is obviously a big game where you would put, lots of attention to detail. Mm-hmm. But the difference is Seattle are at home and might fancy themselves the superior team against Toronto in a way that they maybe wouldn't away to LAFC, right? So do you expect a similarly well thought out defense first game plan, or do you expect the more sort of classic, let's go for it, Seattle?
I absolutely do not expect the similarly well thought out defensive game plan. For the reason you said, right? They're at home. They're going to be in front of 69,000 fans. I think, to use your word, they fancy themselves as an attacking team, a team that wants to be on the ball. And ultimately, I think that the tactical nuance there is marginal and why it matters. The reason it matters to me is that as a player, it's really, really hard to shift your brain back and forth between being in a possession pass creative mode and a destroy mode. There's very few players around the world at the highest levels who can do it well. Seattle have just been better in the second half of the year when they've been more of the destroyer team, more of the against the ball, our back is against the wall club. So I expect them to come out as the attacking team. And yeah, it worries me. I'm not sure that that's what they're best suited to do at this point in the season.
What is their attacking game plan? If you were to just kind of sum it up in a couple of sentences, what's the Seattle attacking game plan?
So it's difficult to describe, right? Because I don't think it was something that they had planned to rehearse coming to the year. I think that the way Brian Schmetzer goes about it is he is very good with man managing, and he plays to the strengths of his players, and it's manifested itself in wide overload, specifically down the left side of the field. I don't know if that's because Brad Smith is a little better attacking at left back than Kelvin Leerdam at right back. I don't know, but I suspect it probably is because Nico Ladero is left-footed and likes to drift to the left side of the field.
Yeah.
So there's not, as far as I can ascertain, there's not a huge amount of detail in what they do, except that when they get the ball in settled possession, Nico Ladero drifts into the pocket or the half space on the left side of the field. Raul Ruiz shifts to that side. Brad Smith comes flying down as the overlap, and all of a sudden they've got a 3v2 or a 4v3, and they get to the end line much in the way Manchester City do. And I will say, when it's at its best, it is absolutely glorious. It hasn't been at its best much in the last year, maybe the first 5 or 6 games, and then they kind of were just mediocre through the rest. But when they are really flying and they're getting those wide overloads, or Jordan Morris is attacking with an outside-in run to go a goal, they are very fun to watch.
And what do you think Toronto can do to counteract it? Because I remember a game earlier in this season, I can't remember if it was at Toronto or at Seattle, where I remember Michael Bradley playing like right side of the midfield diamond, and I think the plan was for him to, be involved in combating that left side overload. And in the end, it still didn't work. So, and I know that you've been impressed with. I've heard you on Extra Time talking about how you're impressed with how Greg Vanney has adapted sort of game by game and adapted to not having Josie and not having Omar Gonzalez. Do you expect him to look at Seattle and say, all right, left side overload, Smith, Ladero, Morris, here's how I'm going to deal with it?
Yes. So you have to, right? It's Toronto. What have separated Toronto for the last 4 years? Because remember, people are new to this. This is the third time in 4 years that these two teams have met in the final. And what really separated Toronto from the rest was a talent. You've got Giovinco, you've got Bradley, Josie, Victor Vasquez. That helps. But really, they had really defined principles of play. Their ability to stay compact 30 to 40 yards from attacking to defending, and their ability to move a defense side to side and break lines, their ability to bring a defense to one side and switch fields were these overarching general themes that they could do pretty much every game. What's interesting now in 2019, with Josie out, with Victor Vasquez gone, with Giovinco gone, with Pozuelo in, is that they're not a principles of play team. They still have them, right? They're still a team that can break lines, but this is more of like, let's have a specific game plan for this specific day and just figure out how to survive. And thankfully, most like all but two MLS teams don't have their own principles of play, so they don't have solutions, right? For the most part, if you're talented and you disrupt another team's rhythm, they're in trouble in Major League Soccer. So that's all to say. What's best for this team right now is, for me, is to do another game plan that's specific for the Sounders that just throws them off their game. What I think that Toronto will do, because they have nothing to lose, they're on the road, they've already had this glorious run through the playoffs, is that they come out in a regular 4-3-3, and they also try and be the team that is more attacking.
So in that 4-3-3, when I've seen them, with no Josmir Volmi-Altidore, it's Pozuelo as a striker, but he kind of wanders around and comes deep. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, do you think that can be effective against Seattle? Because I was thinking, I heard you talk about the Seattle game plan against LAFC and how Carlos Vela, being a player that likes to check rather than running behind, sort of played into Seattle's hands a little bit. So I'm wondering if there's a danger that the Toronto game plan of having Pozuelo roam could play into Seattle's hands.
Well, not as much, because what Toronto have done very well, and Daryl, how do you feel about the word false nine? Where are we with the false nine title?
I mean, I like it in that it describes a thing that a player does. I mean, it kind of describes what Pozuelo has been doing, right? And I would agree it's overused, and maybe there are some people using it who don't really know what it means, and it becomes like a bit of a hipstery slang term. But it's still a thing that exists, and I think Pozuelo is a good example of a player playing that role.
I think he is too. I'm just kind of tired of people using that term, if I'm being honest. It just feels overused, so I've tried not to use it. But if we were, yes, Pozuelo is essentially doing this false nine role coming up as center backs. What's different about LAFC and Seattle is that LAFC kept their wingers wide. Again, you watch Manchester City, it's similar to what they do, where it's Sterling or Mahrez or Silva on the touchline looking to go 1v1. The difference is that Man City almost always play teams in a deep block, so there's no space behind. Seattle ran like a high line mid block, so there was space to run behind, but because Rossi and Brian Rodriguez were instructed to stay wide, they didn't hit it. What Toronto was with Pozuelo, Tsubasa Endo and Nicolas Benazet and Marky Delgado, the three players playing off Pozuelo, are all instructed to run behind, and they do well. They are all quick. They all have huge lung capacity, so they do stretch the line very often. So, no, it's a different task for Seattle against Toronto than it is against LAFC.
I'm interested in Toronto's midfield. I've just been generally impressed with the combo of Bradley, Osorio, and Delgado. There seems to be like a nice balance there. And I was also reading Mr. Weeby's column about Bradley is special and MLS fans should appreciate him. And I know there's this 2020 $6.5 million contract on the line for Michael Bradley. And if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about Michael Bradley for a second, outside of a US men's national team perspective, which is how we always end up talking about him, but just in a Major League Soccer perspective. Can we expect to go into MLS Cup and see Bradley essentially run the show in midfield?
Ooh, well, Darryl, I want you to answer that first. Do you have an opinion on it?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it happen enough in Major League Soccer that I can see Bradley running the midfield in MLS Cup. Yeah.
Man, I just have no idea how to describe this player now. I have no idea how to feel about him. Because I've been a Michael Bradley supporter, defender for a while now. But man, the last 18 months have been grim in Major League Soccer. And I do think that there's a reason, right? I do think he has a million miles on his legs. The dude plays every game. He plays every training session. And as a professional, you have to love and respect that. I know he gets a bad rap, but you could not ask for a more caring, passionate professional than Michael Bradley. Has that maybe taken away from his energy levels on the field in the last 18 months? It seems like it. And like, he is point blank, he is not an elite defensive midfielder in Major League Soccer now. No part of the last year and a half suggests he is an elite defender in this, or elite defensive midfielder in this league. But am I going to bet against him bossing a single game, like getting every ounce of reserves of energy out of his body for this single game? And does he still have the ability on the ball and the passing and just like the intelligence? Yes. So there, I honestly just have no idea. He still has it in him, I think, but like, I've been waiting for him to show this type of game on a regular basis for a year and a half, including against Canada, including when he played for the U.S., and it just hasn't happened.
I mean, is it as simple as saying if Toronto have a load of the ball and it's all about just Michael Bradley, finding Pozzuelo and, maybe controlling the tempo of the game, then he can do it. But if it's Michael Bradley having to chase Nico Lodeiro around, his sort of defensive crouch and trying to play the angles is not going to be enough. So it might just be as simple as with the ball good, without the ball bad.
Well, my response to that is what's probably the single most important trait for a center midfielder in soccer right now. It might be defensive transitions.
Yeah. Right?
It might be the ability to offensive mark, to take the foul, to track into the channel, right? None of which he's doing particularly well at the moment. It really has done that's actually not true. He did it well at phases in his career. So I almost wonder if it's more dangerous for them to have a lot of the ball to send their outside back forward, and then all of a sudden Jordan Morris is going to the channel where it's like Omar Gonzalez and Michael Bradley have to cover space. So I see what you're saying, and the logic is right, but I add in that defensive transition part where every time Toronto have the ball, they're also at risk to a counter. It's been true all year, and I think it's probably going to be true in this game.
So let's talk about Seattle's midfield for a second. I've quite enjoyed the sort of two-man defensive midfield pairing of Svensson and Roldan. And I'm thinking about Roldan in a men's national team perspective, where maybe he ends up a little higher up the field, and I feel like he struggles to influence the game as much. But I quite like him when I see him a little deeper for Seattle. Would you agree with that? Because you've obviously seen more of Seattle than I have this season.
So it's the way they set up is, I'm a big believer that like a 4-2-3-1 is very different than a 4-3-3.
Yeah.
And they describe it as a 4-2-3-1, but they play a 4-3-3. Like Christian Roldan gets into the box, he gets between the lines, he gets up and down, and Gustav Svensson, the Swedish defensive midfielder, is very disciplined. And I would say the U.S. men's national team fans are listening to this but don't watch Major League Soccer and who have decided that Christian Roldan is like a soft, weak, mediocre midfielder. Just don't watch him in league play, because he is the opposite. He is a damn warrior. And it is like watching him against LSC, watching him in some of the big games for Founders, he looks just as up for the battle as anyone, any international player, any American player. And it's really hard to contextualize that difference between him with the Sounders as like this fighter ready for any big game and what we've seen with the national team.
Do you have any theories on maybe why he doesn't seem to have that same combative element when he plays for the men's national team?
Yeah, I think it goes back to this main theme about Berhalter's. I know everyone talks about possession, they talk about these different things and how the team is soft and not winning balls in the field. And remember early in the show, I just talked about how it's hard to go back and forth between being a passer in a moment and then a destroyer, right? It's the human brain doesn't go between angry and creative that quickly. And what Berhalter's doing, trying to be a passing team, trying to play in a passive middle block, it is just hard to really be a competitor in that. It is really hard to get your energy levels up and your intensity levels. And I understand tactically why Berhalter is doing it, but I also think he is just missing this human element where the tactics aren't nearly as important as the way it makes the players feel. Whereas the Founders, going back to what we said earlier about, it's not incredibly detail-oriented. It really is the players take the onus of it, and that allows Roldan to really show his full energy level.
Does this go to a conversation we had way back about sort of flow state, where you're not really thinking too hard, you're just sort of in the moment and reacting?
Yeah, and to me, that's something we don't talk about with tactics enough, is just how it helps players get into that optimal performance state, right? If all players talk about, I was in the zone or I was in flow state and that's when I was at our best, coaches should think more about how do we help them accomplish it? How do we help them turn off their brain so that they're playing on instinct?
And then that's a bit more of the Roldan we see in MLS then is a bit more closer to his flow state than the one for the national team.
Exactly.
Let's talk centre-backs. I feel like on both of these teams, the centre-backs are, I guess it's true of MLS in general, right? The centre-backs are not the big stars and not talked about as much. I'm really interested in, for example, Seattle in the post-Chad Marshall era. It seems that Kim Ki-hee has become kind of the key central defensive figure, but I can't say that I know all that much about him. So what's your take on Kim Ki-hee?
Yeah, Kim Ki-hee is a good player. It's an interesting story. He was playing in the Super League in China. And then remember a couple years ago, China changed their rules to decrease the number of foreign players?
Yeah.
You remember that? They had an exodus of pretty talented players. So we think to ourselves, if you get signed by China for that 2-3, I think he was like on a $2 million deal in China, you're a decent player. I mean, they're talking about South Korean international. For a South Korean national team, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
But because he had to leave China, like literally they just had to get rid of him as quickly as possible. Garth Lagerwey, who is just, the best GM in Major League Soccer probably, jumped on that. And he got essentially a player who cost $2 to $3 million in the world market for, I think he's making $700,000 in Major League Soccer. He is very calm on the ball. He is deceptively quick. He's just a good, a lot of center backs, you can describe the one part of their game. He is just a good soccer player back there.
All right, so Kim Ki-hee's worth keeping an eye on. And then for Toronto, every time I've seen them, Chris Mavinga has caught my eye with a lot of last-ditch...
In a good way or a bad way?
In a good way, in that there's a lot of last-ditch poke tackles, but then in a bad way that he has to keep making last-ditch poke tackles.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Chris Mavinga, and I would put him in the same category as Leandro Gonzalez-Perez. Two guys who I think are probably the two most talented players. And I know that everyone loves Miles Robinson right now. Everyone and Nico Parra is fantastic. But if you're talking a full range, defending, athleticism, short passing, long passing, aerial ability, Mavinga's up there. And the same problem with Mavinga and Leandro Gonzalez-Perez from Atlanta is that, some games they just do who else is Francisco Calvo? Some games it's just like this person doesn't even want to be on the field right now.
Okay.
But when he wants to be there, he's fantastic. And I don't know if that inconsistency is a part of his game. That's the reason he's in Major League Soccer and not in the Premier League. Or if it's just something about MLS and being abroad which makes him turn off. But yes, incredibly talented, maybe one of the top 2 or 3 most talented center backs in the league. You just don't know what you're going to get on any given day.
So if Omar Gonzalez is fit, which is possible, right? Because I think he's made the bench on his way back to fitness. There's a chance he's fit for MLS Cup. Does Lawrence Simon miss out? Does Chris Mavinga miss out? Or did Toronto go back to the 3 centre-backs, back 5 kind of thing?
So Omar was on the bench the last 2 games, actually. Both NYC and Atlanta, and didn't get back in, come back injury. Let's go to the 3 center backs. You talked about defending the wide overloads, protecting against counterattacks. Just in terms of the logic of the tactic, the 5-3-2 makes the most sense to me. But what I think that Greg Vanney will do is 2 parts, right? He will, 1, say, we're playing with house money. We actually feel like the Sounders are just an okay, good, not great team right now, and we can play with them on the road. And B, this overarching theme of teams wanting to just make a statement to themselves that they can play with anyone. That if you play a 4-3-3, it instills this thought in your players that we're out here to win. Whereas if you play a 5-3-2, which is reactive, maybe it lowers your energy levels and it makes you a little scared of what's to come. I suspect that they'll stay with the 4-3-3, and honestly, whether they put Omar in for Simon, I have absolutely no idea.
But you think either way, it'll be Mavinga keeps his place.
Yes, and remember, Lawrence Simon is really interesting. Captain of LAFC last year, at a moment when he was literally the last man left off Belgium's world team.
Yeah.
So he was good to, mediocre to good in Major League Soccer. But going back to the Chris Mavinga and pure talent, I mean, Lawrence Simon was literally going to be the backup to Vertonghen and Alderweireld at the World Cup. Somebody ended up getting fitness at the last second. But Simon was, I believe, even in France at one point, or in wherever the World Cup was, waiting with the team, and then he left because that person gained fitness. So just that's a way to think about who this guy is as a player and what he can offer.
Is there anything...
Where was the World Cup? Russia.
It was definitely in Russia.
Russia.
Is there it was the Women's World Cup was in France, right? Are there any tactical things I haven't asked you about that you think are really important in this game?
The only other thing I would look for is how Toronto defend and or press. Because for the most part, they've been a zonal team, right? Either in a 4-4-2 with the attacking midfielder with like two strikers up high and two lines of four, or a 4-4-1-1. But against NYCFC, they pressed high and man marched, literally matched up all over the field. Same with early against Toronto or against Atlanta. I mean, remember the penalty kick that came against and the first goal were both because Lawrence Simon and Chris Mavinga followed somebody, and Michael Bradley tracked the run through, which usually you would see a pass on there. So I'll just keep an eye on early in the game. Is Toronto playing their traditional zone, or are they sticking with this more man-to-man aggressive defensive scheme?
And that would be dangerous, right? Wouldn't that be dangerous with like the pace of Morris over the top? And you know what I mean? That would be a risky proposition from TFC.
Absolutely. I mean, it was risky. They got totally torched twice early against Atlanta. NYCFC took a while to figure it out. But again, if you're in one single game, the idea that you're playing against something you haven't seen before, something that's unconventional, might have an advantage. But I don't know which way they'll go with it.
Okay, well, I will keep an eye on that. Hey, it's Daryl here, interrupting myself to let you know that today's show is sponsored by Dollar Shave Club. Much like an episode of TSS, Dollar Shave Club put a lot of time, thought and effort into making the best product possible. That's why their shaving products are genuinely high quality. And I am deadly serious, because Mr. Taylor Rockwell wouldn't put any old stuff in his beard. He demands the best. But the Dollar Shave Club name may be a little misleading, because these guys do way more than just shaving products. They actually have you covered head to toe with everything you need to shower, shave, style your hair, brush your teeth. You've heard us talk about the toothbrush, and even wipe your butt. Basically, if you can do it in the bathroom, Dollar Shave Club has you covered. One product I'm particularly fond of is the Wanderer, the hydrating daily face cleanser made with citrus and Hawaiian ginger. No dryness, just freshness all over my face. You can put the quality of Dollar Shave Club's products to the test for yourself. Their Ultimate Shave Starter Set has everything you need for an amazing shave. The Executive Razor, some shave butter, the Prep Scrub, you know I love the Prep Scrub, and the Post Shave Dew. The best part is you can try it for just $5. After that, the Restock Box ships regular size products at regular prices. Get your Ultimate Shave Starter Set for just $5 at dollarshaveclub.com/TSS. That's dollarshaveclub.com/TSS. Okay, I'm feeling all freshened up now, so let's get back to my conversation with Bobby Warshaw. If memory serves, we're about to pivot away from MLS Cup and talk some US men's national team. Bobby, before we started recording, I also warned you that I had a couple of US men's national team questions for you, but you asked me not to give you any spoilers because you wanted to deal with it on the fly. Here's what I wanted to ask you. Are you ready? Deep breath.
Yeah.
So you know we've had lots of conversations, right? And I think of you as someone who is very open to doing things differently in soccer, if that makes sense. Like not just doing things the traditional way because that's the way it's always been done. So I thought of you when there were all these quotes that came around about Greg Berhalter running the men's national team and trying to make it more like a club atmosphere. I think it was Bruce Arena who had said that he's trying to coach it like a club team. And then obviously when he called up the 20 MLS players for the extended camp in this run-up to the Canada game, I see that as like trying to have more like a club type thing where you get a lot of time together before a game. So are you more positive than most people on the idea of Berhalter sort of trying a new thing and trying to run a national team like it's a club team?
Yes.
Okay.
So I've been saying since the beginning, not that I would definitely do it, but it should be a conversation that it's like you pick your 20 players 3 years out from the World Cup and you just train them together. Because if we just, in the grand scheme of things, like how is the United States going to really, and I know this hurts people, right? But these are people who don't actually think about we're U.S. in the world scheme of football. But like, how is the United States really going to make a World Cup final? It's truly going to be on our team. Are we really that close? Even in 2006, even in 2010, even with all the money for the academy, like we're really that close breaking into the top 8 or top 10 teams on talent. And that's not about us, right? We might not have done anything wrong. It's just that 20 countries around the world have a 70-year head start in developing footballers.
Yeah. And everyone else is trying to be good as well, right?
What's that?
Everybody else is trying to make the quarterfinals, semifinals as well.
Correct. So like if we're not going to do it on talent, then what are you going to do? And for me, this idea of having a cohesive, detailed team and game plan is a way to have a competitive advantage. And maybe you miss out on talent, right? If somebody breaks through, if Alex Mendez breaks through in 2 years in the Ajax, like maybe you miss out on having an Ajax player. Nobody really wants to have that. But if you're truly going to create a plan, because to me it seems in sports that we have this totally insane idea of like, you're a team, we're a team going to play, and may the best squad win, right? As if like it's not clearly obvious who the David is, who the Goliath is, and where David has his strengths, and where Goliath has his strengths, and how to make that work. Daryl, to sum this up, I'm perfectly fine with exploring this idea that let's just pick 20 players, let's have them like each other, let's have them build up and a cohesive game plan, and use that as our competitive advantage. And
then the obvious question is, how much time would you give that? Because I'm sure you'd agree it didn't look good in October away to Canada. So are you like me thinking that the corner has to be turned pretty soon for us to stick with this? Or do you give even more leeway to Berhalter trying out this idea?
More leeway. Like, I thought he was a fine hire, right? I don't know if it was the best hire, but I thought he was fine. I trust he's a smart guy with good instincts who thinks really deeply about these things. And I just use the comparison of, he is my stock portfolio, right? I put my money in. I know I'm going to take it out at age 65, and I'm not going to concern myself or freak out just because it goes down in the meantime. And in the terms of this metaphor, I'm taking my stock out in August of 2020, right? That is World Cup qualifying starts. And I put my trust in him for a reason. And I know that stocks and the team are going to go up and down, and I'm not going to bail now. So when would I, answer is no, I wouldn't change paths, right? If this is the path you're picking, processes and plans take time. I understand why other people might do it differently, but I would stick with it, and I would keep my trust.
What about the, it seems like there's been a negative reaction from people like Bruce Arena. He seemed to say it somewhat dismissively, like he's trying to coach it like a club team. Do you think there might be too much of a, this is the way you traditionally run a national team, and there might be too much resistance for Berhalter to overcome?
So my response to that is, like, it's completely legitimate for somebody like Bruce Arena or coaches to say that, and you should absolutely take that feedback. But Darryl, we should always remember that at some point, like, zonal marking defensively was completely laughed at and frowned upon and mocked around the world, and it was a total battle to get zonal marking. Transitions didn't exist. The idea that an attacking midfielder had to defend was blasphemy, right? And I horrible until it works. And if you legitimately believe that this is the right way to go about it, somebody has to move the sport forward. And like I said, I'm not 100% positive that there's is right here. Like, yeah, you definitely shouldn't bail just because a 65-year-old thinks that it's a bad idea. Does that make sense?
It is, but I think you basically said "Okay, Boomer" in there somewhere.
Yeah, maybe.
What about the reaction from fans? It seems like a lot of fans have this. I mean, I see this on Twitter all the time. Anytime I tweet anything about the national team, I get a lot of negative responses about Berhalter and the playing style, and we shouldn't be doing this. Do you worry that, like, even though maybe you have the patience for it, and maybe you're someone who I think of as interested in new ideas and new ways of doing things, could it be that US soccer and Greg Berhalter run out of time with the US fan base?
Like, it comes back to the point, like, when do the stocks come to fruition, right? Where none of us are actually taking our stocks out of the market until World Cup qualifying. So he could literally lose every single game, and then if he beats Mexico, he beats Costa Rica, he beats Panama in World Cup in the Hex next August and September, then all fine. So it's like he could literally lose all of their faith. They could all come out on Twitter every single day. But then if he wins the first 4 games in the Hex, it's fine, and he's going to be revered.
So maybe now's the time to buy stock.
Maybe. And like I said, I'm not positive. Here's my thing with the national team. All right, well, let's just do this, Darryl. Let's do it.
Okay.
Here's my thing with the national team, right? There's so much hindsight bias in sports where you can look at what's happened, and then you look back and you say, oh, I knew that would happen all the time. And one of the reasons I Greg Berhalter is doing, because I can legitimately look myself up there and say, I would probably have done every single thing that he's done. That if you gave me the keys to this team, I would have made a lot of the same decisions. Because whatever was going on before wasn't exactly working. they're saying, how is this guy, why is he trying to build a possession on the back? I want to go back through their conversations and their tweets in 2009, because I sure as hell bet that they're screaming at the television screen that this team can't pass out the back and that they long all they do is play and counter.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So like, this team, American soccer, like the players we develop, we need to be better at passing a soccer ball. We need to be better at controlling a soccer ball. Is it ideal for the U.S. men's national team and the head coach to be the one making that statement? Obviously not. But somebody had to make the damn. Somebody had to try and push through the wall. I would have done it if I were him, and I'm certainly not going to drag him through the mud for trying something that I would have tried. And everyone out there who is mad, like, I just ask, what would you have done? Like, take away hindsight. Take away the fact that it didn't work, or it hasn't worked so far. Like, what would you legitimately have tried to do if you started this team? Because if you're going to tell me that you would have sat and countered, you're lying. You weren't just lying. Because everyone out there was pissed that we had done nothing but sat and countered, plus this general idea, potentially myth, that American soccer had become a more technical prize. So anyway, Darryl, that's my kind of 2 cents on, has it not worked? Yeah, clearly. But I also would have failed too. So I will personally just take the L if it fails and act like I would have gotten right to begin with.
And if we're thinking big picture, it seems to me that Ernie Stewart will take the L if it fails, because it definitely seems like, at least in my head, he's a very Dutch-influenced soccer person. I imagine that the choice of Berhalter, the choice of Rafael Vicky, is a lot about the way that Ernie Stewart thinks the US should be playing soccer. So as long as he's general manager, I think this is something like the style we'll be going with, right? So we could fire Berhalter, but I feel like Ernie Stewart would hire another coach who wants to play possession soccer.
So, all right. First of all, I went to the 17s. I thought that watching them in qualifying, I thought that Wiki was incredible. Like the fact that team stumbled so dramatically was a total shock to me. And I would have bought every ounce on Rafael Vicky. In terms of the full, I think that the words possession are red herring, right?
Okay.
Because you can talk about a team as if that they only do one thing. But remember, there's 4, depending on the way they see your game. I see the game that there's 9 phases, right? There's 9 distinct stages within a game. And within that, you have to have essentially 9 different teams and 9 different game plans. So it's not about whether you're a possession team. Like every team should be a possession team if the opponent has numbers behind the ball, right? It's not about being counterattacking a possession. It's about going fast when there's space to go fast. It's about being able to slow down and having ideas when you slow down. Part of that is, most of the teams the U.S. have played have had numbers behind the ball, so you've tried to possess but it's not about the idea of possession. It's the inability to get the other 7 phases aligned with the team. The passive middle block for me doesn't work with anybody. It sure as hell doesn't work with this.
Yeah, I very much agree on that. I've been worried about that for a while.
It's not the fact that Greg Berhalter is trying to get this team to pass. It's the fact that he hasn't properly aligned the other 8 phases, which you can honestly say is a bigger mistake or a bigger failing than just trying to get the team to pass. But I caution us to think only about possession when it's not about the possession. For me, the possession is absolutely right, and it's also minimal compared to the other parts of the game.
So is it fair to say the one big thing you would change is that passive middle block, like that weird 4-4-2 shape that we defend in?
Yeah. So the point of the passive middle block is a protective game plan.
Yeah.
It is probably the best shape at limiting good opportunities from the opponent, right? Problem is that you don't wreak any havoc. You don't make them uncomfortable. You don't create transition moments. Even when you do create transition moments, you're not in great spots to create your attacking transition patterns to take advantage of the space. And right now, the problem with this team is he's trying to pass. I get it. It's smart. It's good. But you clearly don't have the players for it. So while you conduct this process of being able to use possession to create goal-scoring opportunities, which is a work in progress and isn't creating goal-scoring opportunities for you, you need your defensive game plan to carry some of that weight to help you score goals, which is the problem with the passive middle block selection.
All right, Bobby, I think we should end it there. I feel like that's given us lots of food for thought, but I fear that I could take up your whole day if I keep asking you US men's national team questions.
And I could do it. And what I'll say is, I think it's just important to acknowledge with everyone in this conversation that we're all fallible. Nobody really knows. And I think the part that makes me mad is when I open up Twitter, I listen to people's shows, they act like they know. They act like they have it right. And the truth is, I guess the truth is that like there's no right decision with this team. At least we can have the conversation in an interesting, honest, and intellectual way, opposed to just pretending like it's still Jurgen Klinsmann who isn't even putting 2 cents of thought into it.
Right, yeah. I mean, I would prefer, just for the Total Soccer Show, I'd prefer for us not to be like, this doesn't work, Berhalter out, because then there's no conversation about like what he's trying to do and which parts of it are working and aren't working. So I much prefer the ongoing conversation about the various ups and downs rather than the thing that I see from a lot of people, which is just, I'm out on this, like I'm never watching the US again.
For sure. And listen, maybe I'm a little forgiving to Berhalter, but like the dude is smart. The dude thinks deeply, and I think I've just been craving that person in charge of the national team for 10 years now, right? Since Bob left. And that doesn't mean that Bruce and Jurgen might not be good coaches and they're, great coaches in some ways. But like I just think we needed somebody who thought more deeply, and that could seep into the ecosystem. So that is probably why I give Greg a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt. We should also, in ourselves, take that precedent and like think about it, opposed to just getting angry.
So changing culture as well as a playing style.
Yes, and like a culture that hopefully seeps into the rest of the ecosystem.
Oh, lovely. All right, to bring it full circle, is there any player or thing to look out for in the MLS Cup game that we started off this conversation talking about that has, importance for the men's national team? Like, is it Roldan's performance, Morris's performance, Bradley's defensive performance? What's the one men's national team thing that you'll be thinking about during MLS Cup?
Ooh, that is a great question. I will go with, I think you have to stick with Jordan Morris, right? You have to stick with, is he legitimate star, right? Because if you want in Major League Soccer, in the national team, he's been a star recently. So is he at that level, or is he just a fine player with a bump in form for the last few months?
So it'll be like, is he the guy that can step up and win a trophy for his team?
Well, he is that ability, but it comes back to the old question, like, is it form or is it quality? And I still think that question on whether he is legitimately has the quality of a star player, or if he's just like find a good player who can put together a game or a month at a time that's very good.
All right. On that note, Bobby,
that distinction makes sense.
It absolutely does. Yeah. On that note, I will. I'll let you go so you can go and enjoy what there is to enjoy in Seattle. I hope this conversation was lively enough to give you a bit of a nice equivalent of a cup of coffee in the morning.
It is. I've always loved having these conversations with you.
All right. Thanks, Bobby. I hope to see you soon. Hope to talk to you again soon.